Hi children, are we ready now for chapter 9 of Zeepa the Wichagong? This chapter happens mostly at Tom's school when he goes in on Monday morning, and it starts from there. Chapter 9. It was a goblin, I tell you, a real live goblin with pointy ears and clothes and everything. Hamish looked around his audience of school pupils who had gathered in the playground as they listened to the story of his weekend adventure. "No such thing as goblins," said one of the boys. "You're just making it up." "I tell you," said Hamish, "we were hunting for rabbits and we caught a goblin." "Rubbish," said another. At this point, Tom arrived at school. He saw what was happening in the playground and he tried to avoid the scene. Andrew, however, saw him from the corner of his eye. He said, "Look, here's Tom. Ask him. He'll tell you," he announced to the throng of people. Hamish spun round and beckoned Tom over. Reluctantly, Tom approached the crowd. "What is it?" he said. "Tell them, Tom. Tell them about the goblin we caught," said Hamish, as he caught Tom's eye in a challenging gaze. "Goblin? I don't know what you're talking about," said Tom. "That thing we caught on Saturday, it was a goblin," said Hamish fiercely. "Hamish," said Tom, "what you caught in your rabbit trap was not a goblin." "What?" said Hamish. "How can you say that? Of course it was a goblin." "Hamish, it had pointed ears. It was about 10 inches long, covered in a reddish fur. Sounds more like a squirrel than a goblin to me." The other pupils in the playground started laughing, and one of them cried out, "Ha! Goblin! It was just a squirrel." Another called out, "What an idiot, Hamish. You actually thought you caught a goblin. You're crazy." Hamish's face went as red as Zeepa's fur when he was trapped in the cage. "You're a liar, Tom. It was a goblin, and you know it. It had clothes on." "Clothes?" said Tom. "It didn't have clothes, surely." The audience were loving this. They were laughing and smiling, all at Hamish's expense. Hamish could not stand it as he rushed at Tom with his fist pulling back, ready to punch him in the face. But suddenly, there was a clicking noise from inside Tom's rucksack. Hamish stood on his lace as he rushed forward. He tripped over and he fell full length on the ground, whacking his head on the hard tarmac as he did so. Again the audience laughed. Hamish got up on his feet and was readying himself to attack again when the school bell rang. The big wooden door of the school opened and the teachers came out into the playground, ready to herd their pupils into their classrooms. "I'll see you later, you liar," said Hamish, glaring at Tom. As they were heading towards the school door, Andrew whispered to Hamish. He said, "Listen, Hamish, I'd piped down a bit on saying we caught a goblin. It does sound a bit crazy. Tom's probably right. It was probably a squirrel or something like that." Hamish just glared at Andrew as they went in for their lessons. As they were settling down at their desks, there was still a lot of murmuring and tittering and chatter going on as the pupils looked across at Hamish, and every so often you'd hear the word goblin or squirrel being mentioned before more laughing. Hamish, the bully, just stared at his desk with a very red face. "This is great," thought Tom. "Andrew is really doubting now if he's what he saw on Saturday, and I don't think Hamish will be mentioning goblins for a while, that's for sure." Tom gazed around the class, enjoying the humour, until his eyes rested on Zoe. She was not joining in with the secret discussions. She was not laughing. Instead, she looked sad. In fact, Tom thought she looked very sad, almost on the verge of tears. The lesson started with history, and Mrs. Vanstone, the teacher, gave a fascinating account of life in a Viking village. Then, after her story was finished, as was her way, she started asking the class questions about what she had just told them. "Hamish," she started, "what were the homes of Vikings called?" Detached, said Hamish. Mrs. Vanstone just rolled her eyes. Tell him, Zoe. Zoe was startled. Her face blushed, and she said, sorry, Mrs. Vanstone, what did you say? Mrs. Vanstone frowned. Zoe was always one of the most clever in class, Tom and Zoe being the cleverest. She was never inattentive. I asked, what is the name given to a Viking's home, Zoe? I'm sorry, Mrs. Vanstone, said Zoe, her face turning a stronger shade of red. I don't know. Mrs. Vanstone was obviously surprised at this. She hesitated before saying, anyone? And a boy shot up his hand. Long houses, miss, she said confidently. Yes, well done, Paul, said Mrs. Vanstone. Long houses. But Mrs. Vanstone stared at Zoe. The morning went on in a similar fashion, with Zoe not being her normal attentive self. Tom was quite worried about her. He wondered if she was unwell. When the school bell rang, signalling break time, Tom picked up his rucksack and sat by himself at the wall in the far end of the playground. So what do you think of that then, Zeepa? He whispered to his bag. A voice like all of nature came from inside the bag. I enjoyed it, Tom, thank you. It put me in mind of my school too. You know, some pupils know the answers and some don't. Well done this morning too. I don't think Hamish will be talking about goblins anymore. Tom heard Zeepa softly chuckle inside the school bag. Tom laughed quietly too. Then pausing, he said, Zeepa, one of the people who didn't know the answers today was a girl that I really like. But she usually knows all the answers, but she didn't today. I think there's something wrong with her. She looked really sad this morning. Do you mean the girl called Zoe? Asked Zeepa. I could tell the teacher was a bit surprised by her answers. Yes, Zoe, said Tom, looking around the playground for her. Is she your friend, Tom? Asked Zeepa. No, said Tom, but I wish she was. Just then he saw Zoe at the far side of the playground, alone and crying into her handkerchief. Tom's heart lurched. She's crying, Zeepa, he explained. I can see her now, and she's crying. Then you must ask her what the matter is, said Tom. You must see if you can help her. Zeepa, that is... Zeepa, I don't really know her. Not really. Well, said Zeepa, this will give you an opportunity to get to know her, Tom. Tom's heart was beating loudly. He was excited at the chance to perhaps help Zoe, but at the same time he was worried that what she may say was wrong with her. What if I can't help her, he thought. Oh, I hope she's all right. All these emotions hit Tom's brain at once. He rose to his feet and was just about to approach Zoe when the school bell rang again, and the pupils all went back to their classes. The late morning class continued in a similar vein to the earlier morning session. Zoe was struggling to pay attention, and she kept drifting off, staring into space. Mrs. Vanstone realised that something must be wrong with Zoe. So unusual was Zoe's behaviour. So Mrs. Vanstone actually stopped asking Zoe questions. After a period that seems to last a lifetime, the school bell rang again, signalling lunchtime. Tom's heart was in his mouth. He had made up his mind he was going to ask Zoe if something was wrong. He sat on the far wall again and took out his sandwich. He also gave Zeepa the carrot that he had requested to eat, together with a small bottle of water to drink from. Tom looked around the playground. Again Zoe was sitting by herself, looking incredibly sad. Tom stood up. Then he sat down again. What is it? Asked a musical voice from inside the rucksack. Zeepa, maybe she's okay. Maybe she would just rather be left alone. There was no response from the bag for a full 30 seconds. Tom was just about to repeat his reply to Zeepa, thinking the Wichagong had not heard him, when Zeepa said, Tom, you must go to her. The Zonga is telling me that it is the right thing to do. The Zonga? Exclaimed Tom. What has it got to do with the Zonga? I thought the Zonga only guided you on matters that were important to nature. That's correct, Tom. And the Zonga is telling me that you should go to her. So I think you should do it now. Tom stood up. His heart was beating so much, and his knees were shaking and his mouth was drying as he walked towards Zoe. Then from the corner of his eye, he saw Hamish and Andrew approaching her from a different direction. Tom slowed his step, but he continued to approach. Not so smart today, are you, Miss Goody Two-Shoes? Said Hamish to Zoe in a smirking, slimy tone. Zoe ignored him and looked the other way. I said, you're not so smart today, are you? Said Hamish in a louder and more aggressive tone. Zoe looked at him, tears beginning to well in her eyes. I'm not feeling well, just leave me alone. I don't care if you're feeling well or not, said Hamish. I'm just telling you that you're not as smart as you think you are you? Leave her alone, Hamish, blurted Tom. He could not believe that he had said this to his larger arch-enemy. What had got into him recently? Hamish and Andrew both swung round to face Tom. What's it to do with you, poor boy? Just butt out of this, okay? No, said Tom. His heart was pounding in his chest. I'm sure Zoe doesn't want to hear any of your daft goblin stories when she's not feeling well, so perhaps it's you and Andrew that should butt out. Tom felt as though he was living in a dream. How many times had he dreamt about standing up to this bully, and now he was doing it for real, in front of Zoe. It was just incredible. But surely, thought Tom, this cannot end well for me. Grab him, said Hamish. And Andrew, who was behind Tom at this point, grabbed Tom, wrapping his arms around him and pinning Tom's arms to his side. Now you're going to get it, snarled Hamish, as he wound his right arm back, preparing to punch Tom in the face with every bit of strength he could muster. Hamish was beside himself with anger. He was thinking of Tom's success at school, of the rabbits getting away, of the goblin thing getting away, of the butcher expressing his disappointment that they could not catch any rabbits, and of his humiliation in the playground this morning. Now Tom was going to pay for it all. But just as his fist started flashing through the air towards Tom's nose, there was a clicking noise from the rucksack. Tom instinctively looked down towards the bag, just as Hamish's fist whizzed past his ear and hit the side of Andrew's head by mistake. Ow! Yelled Andrew, letting go of Tom. Ah! Yelled Hamish as his hand crunched hard against Andrew's bony skull. Tears appeared in their eyes, both in Andrew's and in Hamish's, and they turned around and strode quickly away from the witnesses of Zoe and Tom, obviously scared that they would be seen crying. They disappeared around the corner of the school building, Hamish rubbing his right fist with his left hand and Andrew rubbing the side of his head. Zoe was still sitting on the school wall, and she looked up at Tom. Oh, thank you, she said with a smile. That was really brave of you. Thank you. Tom blushed. It was nothing, he stumbled. Then he took a deep breath and said, I was actually coming to ask you what was the matter and to see if I could do anything to help you. To say that Tom was nervous at this point would have been the understatement of the century. He felt terrified that he had overstepped his place. After all, he was just Tom. Tom with not many friends. Tom who was probably, if he admitted it, a little bit nerdy. And here he was asking the prettiest, most able girl in the whole school if he could help her. Zoe paused and looked directly into Tom's eyes. Tears welled up, and she started crying. In a flash, Tom sat beside her and instinctively put his arm around her. Oh, what is it, Zoe? Please tell me, what's the matter? Zoe took a deep breath. She let out some air. Another deep breath. Dried her eyes with her handkerchief that Tom noticed had a little pink Z sewn into the corner. Then she looked back in Tom's eyes and said, My mum is going to sell Kelty. and she immediately started sobbing again. "What's Kelty?" asked Tom. "My dog, my beautiful border collie. My mum's going to sell her." "Why?" asked Tom. Zoe hesitated. "Go on," said Tom. "Please tell me." Zoe looked at Tom, and she looked into his kind, sincere face and knew her secret would be safe with him. She also knew that she had to tell someone about it, and she had no brothers or sisters she could share it with. And she certainly did not want to tell any of her friends about it. She said, "Oh, Tom, we're poor. As a family, we're poor. You know, my father died when I was 5 years old, and my mother has been doing her best for us. But she doesn't get paid too much in the local shop she works for. And last week, her boss told her that sales in the shop have been going down, and that she might have to lose her job, as the store cannot afford to keep her anymore." A tear dropped from Zoe's eye and onto her cheek. But she continued. "On Saturday, the village butcher came to our house and said that his brother-in-law had visited him from Kent, and he had passed my garden and seen Kelty playing in the garden. This man is a sheep farmer, and the butcher said to my mother he knows a lot about dogs, and he thinks that Kelty could become a great sheepdog with some hard training." "Hard training," said Zoe. "What does that mean?" Before Tom could answer, Zoe continued. "Anyway, the butcher said that his brother-in-law would pay £500 for Kelty. And because my mum might lose her job, she said that she would think about it. Oh, Tom, she's going to sell my dog." Zoe started sobbing uncontrollably again, as Tom, with his arm still around her, gently stroked her shoulder. "Oh, Zoe," said Tom soothingly, "that would be terrible. But your mum said she's only thinking about doing it. She might not." I know, but it's just too awful to think about. I know my mum needs the money though, especially if she's going to lose her job. Anyway, my mum says she will have to discuss it tonight, and then she'll make her mind up." They sat and talked, or rather Zoe talked, and Tom listened for the rest of the lunch break. She talked about Kelty mostly, and about how smart the dog was, and about how beautiful the dog was. Zoe obviously loved Kelty a great deal. The afternoon lessons flew past, as Tom in a bit of a daze went over and over his conversation with Zoe in his head. He was really pleased that he had plucked up the courage and had gone to talk with her. Surely her mum would not sell Zoe's dog. Surely that would not happen, he thought. When the final school bell of the day rang, Tom picked up his rucksack and headed towards the playground. He saw that Zoe was about 6 people in front of him in the crowd, heading towards the school gate. He sped up and gently pushed his way through the rest of the pupils until he caught up with Zoe just as she was going through the gate. Tom's home was to the left and Zoe's to the right, so he wanted to catch her just before she turned away. "Zoe," he whispered, "good luck with your chat with your mother tonight. Don't worry, I'm sure she's going to do the right thing." He smiled as he said this, and Zoe, turning towards him, smiled back. Tom's heart skipped a beat as he headed home. When he arrived home, as usual, he said hi to his parents and went to the fridge to pour himself a glass of milk, only this time he poured a larger glass than usual, and he took an egg cup from the cupboard with him too, and he went upstairs to start his homework. When he got to his room, he poured some of the milk into the egg cup and he handed it towards Zeepa, as the Wichagong had crawled from the rucksack and was stretching tall and wide. "Thank you," said Zeepa, and took the milk, drinking deeply from the egg cup. "I enjoyed today, Tom. It was really interesting for me to learn more about humans and how they do things." "Thank you too, Zeepa," said Tom. "What for?" asked the Wichagong, looking puzzled. "For telling me to speak to Zoe and to ask you what was wrong. Without your help, I would never have plucked up the courage to do it," said Tom, smiling his thanks. "It wasn't so much me," said Zeepa, reflecting. "It was the Zonga." "Oh yes, you said that. Why do you think the Zonga wanted me to talk with Zoe?" asked Tom. "I don't know," said Tom, "but there will be a reason, and that will become clear soon. Now, let us think. There may be a clue in what she told you." Tom and Zeepa reflected on Zoe's story. And after a while, Tom said, "I can't really think of anything that the Zonga would really be concerned about, apart from perhaps the welfare of the border collie. Zeepa thought about this for a while before slowly saying, "It would not be totally unusual for the Zonga to help one animal, Tom. But I feel there's more. Much more that the Zonga is trying to influence. And it's our job to find out what, Tom." They discussed Zoe's story again, trying to remember word for word what she said. Then Tom said, "Zeepa, I think it might be something to do with the butcher. Remember, he was the one using the schoolboys to catch and kill the rabbits for them to sell. That's not normal behaviour. I'm sure other butchers would not do it this way, having no care for how the poor rabbits may suffer. And now it's the same butcher whose brother-in-law wants to buy Kelty, the collie. That butcher will do anything to make a profit, and I think he should try to warn him carefully now, and perhaps we can learn something." "Okay," said Zeepa, "that makes sense. But my instinct is also thinking that there's more to it than this." "Is that the Zonga guiding you?" asked Tom. "I'm not sure, Tom," answered Zeepa. "I'm not sure." The Wichagong stared into space for a few seconds, and then he said, "I tell you what, Tom. You do your homework, and I'll go for a little prowl and see if I can learn something." With that, he asked Tom to open the window, and with one bound, he was on to the outside window ledge. One more leap had him onto the tree, and then he disappeared into the leaves. Thanks for listening.